Welcome to The Explainer. All right, let's get right into it because today we are tackling a huge, and I mean huge, theological misunderstanding. It's one that has sparked arguments for centuries, and it all comes down to faith, good works, and salvation in the Catholic Church.
And it really boils down to this one simple question, right? Can you actually earn your way into heaven? Is it something you can achieve just by being a good person? I mean, how you answer that question is at the core of a massive historical split in Christianity.
So let's start with the big misconception. We've got to understand where this whole thing comes from. And to do that, we have to look at the accusation that's so often thrown at the Catholic Church. Yeah, this idea has a name, works righteousness. And it's pretty much what it sounds like. It paints salvation as something you get paid for doing a job. You know, like if you do enough good things, you clock out, and God owes you heaven as your wage. It's not a gift. It's something you've earned.
And this right here is the classic standoff. On one side, you've got the accusation, Catholics teach you can earn salvation through good works. And on the other, you have the famous Protestant Reformation principle of sola fide, that's Latin for faith alone. The idea there is that salvation comes only through faith, and our human actions have nothing to do with it.
Okay, so with that accusation on the table, how does the Catholic Church actually respond? What's the real teaching? Well, the official, historical answer, it might actually surprise you. Because here's the thing, the Church's answer is a loud, clear, definitive no. It's not just that they don't teach works righteousness, they have formally condemned the idea for centuries. It's the exact opposite of what they believe. And this isn't some newfangled idea either. We can go all the way back to the Council of Trent in the 1500s. They made it incredibly clear. They said, and I'm quoting here, "If anyone says that man can be justified before God by his own works without divine grace, let him be anathema." Anathema is a really strong word. It basically means you're formally cut off from the Church. So, yeah, they take this seriously. This idea that you can save yourself through your own efforts even has a specific name. It's called Pelagianism. And it was officially declared a heresy, wait for it, all the way back in AD 418. We're talking over 1,600 years ago. So this isn't a new debate for the Church. So what's the big takeaway from all this? It's that, according to Catholic teaching, that very first spark of salvation, what theologians call initial justification, is a totally free gift from God. It's unearned. You can't merit it with anything you do, not by faith, not by works. It all, and I mean all, starts with God's grace. Okay, that brings up a really important question, doesn't it? If salvation can't be earned by our good works, then what's the point of them? What role do they even play in the life of a Christian? And this is where things get really fascinating, because the Bible itself seems to throw a wrench in the works. You look at the letter of James, and it says, flat out, a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. So what's going on here? How do you possibly square that with what we just established? Well, the way Catholic theology handles this apparent contradiction is pretty clever. It breaks justification down into two parts. First, you have that initial justification we talked about. That's the free gift. You can't earn it. But then there's what you could call ongoing justification. This is where we cooperate with that grace God gave us, and through our good works, we actually grow in righteousness. So you see the distinction? It's absolutely crucial. Good works don't cause our initial salvation. They flow from it. They're the evidence, the fruit, of a real, living faith that's actively working with the grace God has already poured out. And you know, there's another layer to this that really clears things up. When the Apostle Paul was writing about not being saved by works, you have to ask, what works was he talking about? Well, often he meant the works of the law, things from the Old Testament like circumcision. He was telling early Christians, hey, you don't need to follow these old rituals to be saved. But he wasn't rejecting good works, acts of charity and love. In fact, he says elsewhere that we are created in Christ to do those very things. Okay, I know this can sound like we're deep in the theological weeds here. But why does this nuance actually matter? Why is this distinction between earning salvation and cooperating with grace so incredibly important? Well, for one, it's about getting the doctrine right. It's about accurately explaining what the Church actually teaches about grace. But it also has huge moral implications. It reminds us that we have a responsibility to cooperate with God's grace and actually live holy lives. Our choices matter. It also helps us avoid two big errors. On one side, the heresy of thinking we can earn salvation on our own, and on the other, the idea that our actions are totally irrelevant. And you know what? Getting this right is also super important for building bridges and clearing up historical misunderstandings with our Protestant brothers and sisters. So at the end of the day, the Catholic view isn't faith versus works, like some kind of theological cage match. No way. It's more like faith working through love. And the key thing to remember is that the whole process, our faith, our works, everything, is powered by God's grace from beginning to end. And that really leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? If the Catholic view is that both our faith and our good works are ultimately empowered by God's grace, then what has the big historical disagreement really been all about? Maybe the divide isn't quite as wide as we've always been told.